arts and sports. We have the resident sports guy, Kyle, on.
Oh, no.
Also, everyone in this room has a black belt in some discipline of martial arts. So this should be interesting.
That's true.
Whoa.
Martial arts especially is an interesting border case because it's martial arts, but it's also treated as a sport. There are competitions, it's institutionalized.
A lot of it, in my opinion, where it crosses over is the amount of time you put into it. You know, with martial arts, we did it for 10 years before we got our black belt, right? And even then we weren't, I mean, you guys were really good, but I wasn't, the best out there, right? We were not the best out there.
Hey, you weren't one of the 2 to 3 people who ended up dropping out because they were throwing up, so.
That's fair. That's fair. I was trying to read up and brush up on my martial arts this morning, specifically Shotokan karate, which is what we did. I thought it was really interesting because it's broken up into, 3 categories, which is you've got your basics, you got your kata, and then you've got sparring. Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with how much time you put into it.
I know at least for me, sparring and kata were my 2 favorite things. Mm-hmm. I really neglected a lot of the more technical elements. And I know you and Connor tended to like the technical stuff, or at least I might be tripping on that for your case. But I mean, when Connor started becoming the instructor of the place, I know he was studying a lot about random techniques. I'm like, gee, this is a lot.
I always thought the katas were interesting because not only were they, the next level up after you got your basics, because the whole point was you were fighting an imaginary fight against multiple people, but then when you are doing the kata, it's in a particular pattern, which creates a really cool iconography when you look at it. I remember the yellow belt's like an eye, but then the more complex you go, the weirder the shape gets, which in and of itself is a interesting art piece.
That's what threw me off a lot about some of the katas was it was so abstract in some of the movements, but after you do them for so long, like as you said, the eye shape of the left, block, punch, other way, go fill out the bottom, walk, bump, 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 all that everything back down. Then when it gets to like red belt kata, it's like there are so many abstract directions. We're just making like seagulls at this point, or seagulls. I love seagulls.
Oh, I
we're making aquatic birds right now.
I did not get sigils from that.
We're doing the Steven seagulls right now.
Now, this applied for kendo kata from my experience. I don't know if it applied to karate as much, but I noticed once you got to a certain point in kata, because there was a step system, there was kata 1, kata 2, kata 3, all the way up. The higher kata did not necessarily last longer, but the shapes got more complex to perform at a proficient level. Like I remember, also for those unacquainted, kendo is the art of Japanese sword fighting, or the sport of Japanese sword fighting. Kenjutsu is the art of fighting with a sword. And I've noticed that with several martial arts, the misconception made is that all of them are a sport, and that is not necessarily the case. Some of them are designed purely for combat, some of them are designed purely for sports, some of them are designed purely for athletics or athletic purposes. And there can be a very fine line, and the only way you can really tell the difference is through the name.
Yeah, traditionally the do suffix, it indicates something that's more institutionalized.
Mm-hmm. With generalized rules across the board.
Exactly. And I think this is one of the areas of distinction between sports and arts is how regulated it is, what kinds of rules are in place. For me, sports are often goal-oriented more than arts. I would say art's more a process thing. Because I don't think they're separate things necessarily. There can be artistry to anything you do, including sports. There's people who approach sports and its goal orientation from a artistic perspective.
Shout out to Zach with jump rope.
I was about to pop in and say, though there can be overlap, that does not mean it's inherently overlap.
Inherently in the ability to differentiate from the norm is different.
Yeah, but so let's say the raw form of art. You're painting a picture, and whose picture that they painted is the best. There's not a numerical system you can use to calculate whose picture is the best. It's a purely it's art. Like we're not even going to get into this because that's a whole different podcast about what defines better art, because there isn't anything that defines it. But so we'll go jump rope. I'll elaborate more and give background after I finish this thought. But there is a numerical system that they use to calculate a thing that I think is art. And that's what pisses me off. They're trying to calculate an art form. That's like adding a number system to calculate like fire spinners at a music festival, like, and ranking them on how good their fire spinning was. Like, dude, that's not what the point of it is in my head. And that's where I define there is overlap between several sports and art, like martial arts. There's overlap between the artistry and the sport of it. Sport, there has to be a governing body to define it being a sport, because somebody needs to say what gets you more points in a certain thing and what gets you less points. That just has to be said. Art, people just all community decide. I'm like, yeah, like breakdancing. I don't count that as a sport. I count that as a phenomenal art form that I don't think people should be scoring. I think people should be looking at it and just being like, yeah, that one was better than the other one, and call it a day. They don't need to explain themselves. Like, that's where I like draw the line.
I'm not sure if a governing body is entirely necessary, because most sports start out as a cultural thing.
Well, that culture is in the governing body.
That's fair, yeah.
They have to communally decide. Playing freeze tag, you have to decide what the rules. Is there a base that you touch? So the governing body is the group of people who are sitting right there. They agree on set terms and rules, and then you have to decide. It's like playing what's that dwarf game? The super complicated ecosystem.
Can you give me more clues?
It's like a really pixelated. They accidentally made it so cats could get drunk because of one like miscoding thing they did.
Is it Dwarf Fortress?
Yes, Dwarf Fortress. They made one of the most complicated ecosystems in a game, and then they just set it there and let it play out. Stuff happens all over, and it's like a 8-bit type game, but because it's super complicated. But so the whole point of that is to say, yeah, when you put players out in a soccer field, their ecosystem is going to react with each other. And there's a set of rules that they have to follow, but the ecosystem is going to work out. That's not necessarily the exact same for art, because there's not the rules that they have to follow necessarily.
But there are artists and people who enjoy art who try to classify art by not a scoring system of sorts, but deciding who's the best.
Yeah.
Any artist has to decide on what their metric for a good art is going to be.
It's more numerical stuff is where it becomes, to me, different.
I've always thought of mixed martial arts as one of the purest blends of sport and art, at least in the early 90s when it was first starting out. Because in 1993, the first UFC championship, it was more meant to be a spectacle than a sport. The tagline was, "There are no rules." The goal was to get a submission, and the only way the fight would end was if someone tapped out, was knocked out, or gave up. At that time, the appeal was kind of the novelty of seeing 8 fighters from different backgrounds, different disciplines, fighting on their own terms. And you can see a lot more personal expression back then than most of the time you do now, because now MMA is kind of a formalized style. And that's partially because of the popularity and controversy it ran into in the late 90s. And they started having to put more rules in place. I can't remember, it was only like 10 rules starting out, like no biting, no eye gouging, stuff like that. Then they started piling on more and more regulations that limited what kinds of styles could be effective in the ring.
If their hands are touching the ground, you're not allowed to kick to the head.
Yeah.
Not allowed to throw a knee if their hands are touching the ground, stuff like that.
Which is valid.
I mean, that's valid for safety.
That is a valid safety concern.
But then actually choose.
If you go into the ring knowing that this is a possibility, if you consent, this is going to throw back to the ethics episode. Is it really that valid?
You consent to actually getting brain damage from a kick to the head while you're down.
And the UFC's founders were very much against the idea of having judges with scores. They thought that was like absolutely antithetical to what UFC was supposed to be, because that is an arbitrary point system. You're assigning values based on what the judges think constitutes a good fight. And this is what I'm kind of trying to figure out, is because You also think about something like soccer. Get the ball into the post. That's pretty binary. Either it happens or it doesn't. Versus jump rope. Like, do this routine, have people you don't know write number on a card and figure out if you are better than the other person.
People you don't know, people who have never participated in it, people who haven't watched it necessarily even.
Like if the rope doesn't catch under your toe at the end of the routine and bounces out, but bounces out to a certain extent, it's not a point.
Well, so yeah. I mean, I'll give the quick summary and then I can tangent if someone else wants to talk real quick, because I need to partake of a Modelo before I tangent on anything jump rope related.
Is this going to be related to jump rope and the Olympics?
It probably will be. Do y'all want to talk about karate in the Olympics real fast?
Sure can.
Or see even the concept of karate as a martial art, because
I was watching an interview with Lyoto Machida, who's one of the most successful karate practitioners in the MMA, or in the UFC. And he was talking about one of his big issues with karate as an institution. He has his backgrounds in Shotokan karate. He took issue with the fact that since the 1970s, the World Karate Federation has been pushing to get karate into the Olympics, which, understandable, it's a huge publicity boost. It'll bring awareness to the art, the sport, the culture. But in order to get into the Olympics, you need a lot of stable, very sustainable rules to even be considered.
the rules have to be stable. At least in 2008, the Olympic rules where you have to have a stable set of rules for, back then it was 10 years. You guys have the same scoring system for 10 years.
Universally, around the globe. Everybody must
all the
run by
governing
the same
bodies
rules.
in all the different countries have to have the same scoring system for 10 years. I think they've loosened it recently.
It's also, I believe, whichever governing body is petitioning to be running the Olympics version. Like the world, there are other federations besides the World Karate Federation.
Oh, there has to be one united governing body.
Yeah, it's the World Karate Federation. So there are other groups that are making their own rules about karate, but this is the big one, the recognized one. And they started instituting point systems, rules against full contact sparring, and it severely limits the scope of what karate is. And that's why modern karate is considered kind of a joke among like MMA people. It's like, this is completely impractical. You're not doing anything.
There was a dude who lost the title because he got the winning point. The judge just ruled he kicked too hard. He lost the title because of that. He would have won with that point, but no. Opposite of the Karate Kid movie.
Yeah.
Fucking illegal kick gets the championship.
Karate originated as a form of self-defense, practical art of sorts. And like in the kata, we were talking about kata earlier, they have takedowns, they have some really brutal techniques built into them.
Cane kata.
Cane kata.
I think that fucked a lot of us up for a while.
That and the red belt kata.
And you stick it in and then you pull it out.
Yeah.
Oh.
Whoa,
Monkey snatch
hold
the
on,
peaches.
whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, that one.
I did not like hearing Mr. Chuck explain monkey snatch the peaches.
Also, that did happen in UFC in the early days.
Monkey snatching.
I saw a guy sticks his hand into the dude's pants. And they said there are no rules.
10
Bro, I'll
rules.
stick to kendo. I don't know what y'all are.
I don't know. I think one of the most fun parts I had when we would practice is we would start with a basic takedown that has been established, but then we would figure out another way to take someone down in the same. I think the headlock one was one we did a lot, and I think that one, it's really fun when you're adding a bunch of your own style into it.
I will say my favorite part of the black belt test by far was the speed takedown section.
Yes.
They had one of the masters come up and they'd put you in a hold and you'd have to do the quickest getting out of it in the most effective way you could. And a lot of the techniques we end up doing were not ones we were taught. They were just uses of our body that became fluid of the over the arm scoop, any grabs, any of that stuff. The fact that you can just lift somebody up and throw them on their back, it just let you show what you know.
And everyone has a different body, different strengths, different weaknesses. And this is sort of the art in every sport is there's never a specific set of instructions of how to do something the right way if it involves your physical person because everyone's different.
If you're in gymnastics, there's a set way of doing it. That's my shade.
I don't know enough about gymnastics, but
You can calculate how to get the best score, and then you just have to execute it. But
it's the execution is the thing, because
That's
not
right.
everyone has the same like weight distribution across their body. Especially in like gymnastics and jump rope, men and women need to approach it very differently.
Center of gravity and all that.
Yeah.
as former actively practicing athletes, how does that stuff actually affect us today, even though we don't practice any of it anymore? Like, how has that bettered our life and our endeavors that we do now?
I like that term, formerly practicing.
Practicing practitioners.
I thought it was a weird way to form it. I like it.
That was.
I'm going to dip out of the question because I do not consider myself at any point a practicing athlete except for like soccer in elementary school.
Gee, you were literally a martial arts instructor
That's the closest
for
you can get,
a
Connor.
year.
That is the closest I could
competed.
get. I did compete, but it was always more of an art than a sports to me. I did not. It was a physical art. I was in better shape then than I am now. That was when I was like, wake up in the morning and do sit-ups because I'm like, martial arts is my calling.
I feel that, unfortunately.
But there was also never a competitive element to it for me. I never stacked myself up against people. I went to competitions for fun. And like, it's cool to say that I won this award or that award, but I was a nerd. I liked learning about the history of the art and the, sorry, it just decided to pan.
I was going to
I was
say,
about to say.
I got it all in my right ear now.
Yeah.
I don't have my left ear.
I'm more like learning about the history of the art, like studying kata bunkai, what applications are there to this sequence of moves. And that's where I got into takedowns, where I started getting more interested in jiu-jitsu because they all trace back to essentially self-defense. It was people without the money to afford weapons who would come up with ways to fight people if they had to defend themselves.
That's how hip hop started too. They didn't have enough to afford instruments. So
808.
Yeah. And hip hop was also, people often forget the word rap. It's your ability to talk your way out of a rough situation.
Well, I was also even going to go into the martial arts thing of it's more of a social thing. My big thing on Shotokan karate, whenever it's like mentioned karate in any sort of situations, they're like, now karate's not practical in any situation. Nah, that's like weak. I'm like, yeah, if I'm fighting a trained fighter or boxer, yeah, I'm probably kind of screwed. That is not what it's designed to be.
I'm going to call cap on that.
You can call cap, but I think you would get walked by a boxer.
Well, I would because I am well out of practice, but Lyoto Machida.
He is one of my preferred fighters.
The thing is, the Shotokan system was developed. The Japanese government was looking to create a martial arts system for educating kids. And so they approached one of the leading practitioners in Okinawa, and he created a...
Yes, he created a martial arts that was meant to be a baseline reactive martial arts system. The high blocks and the scoop blocks, to me at least, from what I realized after practicing it for about 10 years, were reactive elements. They're not meant to be you're squaring up one-on-one with somebody who is also martial arts trained in a different thing, and you're meant to just like go at them. It's meant to be someone tries to like grab you, you have your instincts that immediately learn the different directions to move your arms, to cover the different areas of your body, to react to this, to throw a straight punch, to throw a straight kick, to throw the different kinds of techniques you would need in a reactive situation. So to me, Shotokan karate has always been a reactive martial art.
To some extent, yes.
Well, yeah, the up to like black belt level, it's a
Well-
reactive martial art. That just shows you can react to stuff.
So this is the point I was trying to get to, is all of these moves have multiple uses. And this is why it is reactive. You're training your body to move in certain ways that are just going to work well in a wide variety of situations. Like kata is really abstract. You're just kind of putting your arm somewhere. And maybe you have a mental image that like, this is a punch, this is a block. But these ways of moving have multiple applications. So something that you might assume is a strike actually ends up being a takedown.
That's what I was saying. It's a reactive martial arts. You don't necessarily know exactly what the techniques you're using or what their applications are when you're learning. You're just learning the body movement. It's a reaction that you're learning that you then start using impulsively in other situations, as we talked about earlier with the fast-paced takedown release training in the black belt test. We didn't do techniques that we actually learned. We did techniques that were impulsive to us because they were different things. That's why I count Shotokan karate as an impulsive martial arts rather than a refined, like boxing I count as a more refined martial art of you have to know the exact jab, hook, hook, hook. I mean, it's used different ways, but like you don't use a hook trying to get away from like a choke out.
That's a dangerous game of comparison, considering none of us have taken boxing.
I've done boxing.
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Oh.
We've done several of martial arts. We just don't have like degrees in them, so I don't like talking about it unless we're...
I feel like understanding a movement and understanding how to connect it to reflexes is an important thing. Within music, within sports, within life, how does understanding how a movement can be transferred into a reflex come into play?
It's like jamming a song. You learn your triads. You can learn your triads all day. You can learn your scales all day. But at the end of the day, like, how are you going to use those when jamming with someone? If someone coming like back and forth with you, like, how do you actually use them? So,
yes.
Reactive, I can't even think of musical things. I'm not even woke enough on certain musical aspects to be able to compare it.
It's understanding patterns at a certain point. But pattern matching is a very dangerous game because that comes with a certain system.
Because there's somebody who doesn't have the pattern who can come in there. That's why I like Shotokan karate, because it's reactive rather than learned patterns. It's you've learned the patterns. Your patterns aren't necessarily meant to react to the other person's patterns.
I have a question. It's also like chess.
You get really high, and then you try to confuse your opponent.
We don't condone drugs on the podcast. We don't condone drugs on the podcast. I'm on drugs, but we don't condone drugs on the podcast.
We only condone that in person.
After the podcast. What's interesting to me, because I see this comparison between training your muscle memory, your instincts to respond to certain situations. And this is the case in music. It's the case in all sports. But one thing that's...
And cooking. Let's not...
Ethan,
discredit spices
outta here.
Fuck you.
The cooking episode is coming later.
Okay.
In some of these forms and some of these things, whatever combination of sport and art they may be, a important point is studying what others have done. In music, you learn cover songs, you get a set of influences, you learn their music, and you internalize these movements. In karate, this is the kata, but that's still different because that's not like something that somebody did before specifically. And I'm thinking like in chess, you study games that have been played. There are like historical chess games, and people who are studying chess study every move of this game in order to become better at chess by internalizing these movements.
The Richard Gambit.
I'm not experienced enough in other goal-oriented sports. I feel like you can kind of call chess a sport, but it's definitely a game.
Same as esports.
Same idea. Sport has the implication of athleticism.
Yeah.
Sports just, I guess, has higher weight in our culture, which is why gamers decided they're going to call it esports to get some credibility.
Yeah.
E-gamers.
I interpret sports as a synonym of competitive.
Nah, that's just a game.
So chess is a sport?
Yes.
That's fair.
Checkers is a sport.
Catan.
Yes.
Cat.
It depends on interpretation of sports. How physical do you want it to be? How competitive do you want it to be? Which holds more value?
Sports, because it makes more money.
Yeah.
The cultural connotation is that sports involves physical exertion. It involves physical training, like ideally a routine of training your body. And this is why, for instance, when esports was trying to gain credibility, they were emphasizing like hand-eye coordination. And I saw a lot of rhetoric about the kinds of thumb injuries you get from esports.
Oh yeah, no, Smash Bros fucking sucks. Fuck Smash Bros. Fuck the Smash community. I love the game to pieces, but y'all are toxic.
Smash fuck bros.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I didn't say any of that.
But my question for the folks who know more about sports than I do is how common is that, like studying the exact plays in a similar way a musician would learn a song or a chess student would study a chess game?
It depends on how good you want to get.
I don't want to speak for football necessarily because I don't know a lot, but like there are football plays that like people know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have like the jet sweep. You've got, I mean, there's kind of fundamentals that you incorporate into plays,
and that's what I'd compare to like some jazz rudiments to an extent. Like everybody, like you know them. It's just then you do your own variation on them, like your own little spice, and then the other people think you're gonna do it, but then you gave your own little like variation or something.
Right. How you use them. But I mean, they're definitely like historic plays. The flea flicker, like one that comes to mind is Statue of Liberty, where I think this was Cam Newton. He hit the ball behind his back during a play that was supposed to be a handoff. He just hit it behind his back, and the guy was looped out around and tossed it over. And
That sounds kind of hot.
yeah, it worked well.
That is the kind of like artistry in sports that it's hard to find in a lot of sports like that, because then they sometimes, if it's too wild of a good move, they then make rules against it.
Right.
But that, like, I love plays like that in football.
Early on in UFC was one dude, I think his name was Tank something. It's the kind of name of a person who would do this. But there was a dude who picked someone up and tried to throw him over the ring.
I've seen footage
Did it
of
work?
that, yeah.
Almost. He managed to hold on, and they immediately need to make a rule that,
Like, you can't do that.
yeah, because he would have fallen 6 feet onto his head onto metal.
Right. I guess it's not a historical play, but the most recent thing that's kind of garnered that attention is, what do they call it? The tush push, which is basically...
The what?
Yeah. They take a rugby scrum, but put it into, football, where they're on the 1 yard line trying to get a touchdown. The quarterback takes the ball. They've got 2 running backs behind him, and they literally push him over everyone by his butt.
That's efficiency right there.
And so the Philadelphia Eagles did it like every time they're at the 1 yard line, and everyone was like, can we do something else? But I mean, it worked. So it's like,
It's kind of like front flips and stuff. Like, I've been waiting for the NFL to ban any sort of front flip things, because I've seen too many people jump into, I mean, not too many, an appropriate amount. I can't remember the dude who's like the most famous for hitting it, but jump into a front flip to get whacked over a dude just to land on his feet
like the
again.
hurdling.
Yeah.
Wasn't that one of the members of the Cowboys? I might be tripping.
Ezekiel
I think it was
Elliott?
a blue one.
Maybe.
He is very well known for
Again,
hurdling.
I just know I've seen that happen several times, and I love every time I see it, because I'm like, yeah, that's athleticism. You're doing the jump before you take the hit. Then you take the hit mid-air, and then you still land on your feet. Like, I've done probably 1,000 front flips in my life, and I could not take a hit in the middle of a front flip and still land on my feet. Like, that shit is crazy to me.
Bro, and those dudes are like 100 pounds heavier than anybody in this room.
And the fact that, like, I'm not sure if they could land a front flip without the hit, but the fact that they punch up and just rotate their body expecting the person to hit them and rotate, like, that's how it looks every time I've seen it. It doesn't look like they'd land it if the person didn't hit them.
Right.
It's just so, it's insane. I love that.